She thought he wanted to work things out. But behind his smile was a plan to silence her forever. It began as a fight over child support and ended in a crime that shook everyone who knew them. Welcome to True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. The summer sun dipped low over Eastbrook, its fading gold spilling across the streets where Ayanna Price hurried from her shift at the community health clinic. She carried that same quiet determination she always had, head high, hair in a neat puff, the scent of baby powder still clinging to her from holding her 3-year-old son, Cameron, earlier that morning. Ayanna had dreams that stretched further than her paycheck. She wanted to open her own wellness center one day, a place where mothers could come for support, safety, and guidance. But for now, her focus was simple, keeping Cameron clothed, fed, and happy. Darius Holt hadn't been in her life for months, not really. He was Cameron's father, yes, but after their breakup, his visits had become rare and short. The charm that once drew her in had faded to excuses and silences, replaced by short, tense conversations about money. When she'd filed for child support, she told herself it wasn't out of spite, it was survival. Still, she knew he'd see it differently. She just didn't know how deep his resentment ran. They had met 5 years earlier at a block party. Darius, tall and athletic with an easy smile, had been magnetic. He was the type who made everyone in the circle feel like the center of attention. For Ayanna, who had always been careful with her heart, his confidence was disarming. They talked that night about music, travel, and how he wanted a family someday. Within months, they were inseparable. In the beginning, his gestures were constant. Flowers at her desk, surprise dinners, whispered promises that they'd build something lasting. But promises are only as strong as the hands that keep them. Somewhere between late nights out and job changes, cracks began to show. Bills went unpaid. Arguments flared over rent. She discovered text messages from other women that he swore were harmless. And yet, she stayed, hoping the man she loved would return. Sometimes love blinds us, not because we cannot see, but because we refuse to look at what is right in front of us. When she found out she was pregnant, her joy was instant and whole. His smile had been slower to come, shadowed by something she couldn't name. "It's just a lot to process," he'd said, kissing her forehead. But the distance never really closed after that. After Cameron was born, Ayanna's priorities shifted entirely. Darius's didn't. His hours at work grew erratic. Money disappeared without explanation, and when he did show up, he was distracted, checking his phone more than holding his son. By the time they split, she was tired, not just of the arguments, but of being alone in a relationship. Filing for child support had felt like a necessary line in the sand. For Darius, it felt like war. What Ayanna couldn't see was that, beneath his polite text about working things out and figuring it out together, a plan was forming in his mind. One not to fix the problem, but to erase it entirely. The seeds of betrayal grow fastest in the soil of selfishness, watered by fear and greed. Darius showed up more often in the weeks that followed, but it wasn't the kind of presence Ayanna had longed for. He brought little gifts for Cameron, smiled when she opened the door, and kept his voice warm and measured. He asked about her day, complimented her cooking, even offered to help with errands. On the surface, it looked like a man trying to step up. Beneath it, he was gathering something far more dangerous, her trust. They began to share short dinners again, mostly for Cameron's sake. Ayanna told herself it was good for their son to see his parents getting along. Darius told her he was picking up extra work and sorting his finances. She wanted to believe him, and in a way, she did. But Janelle Porter, Ayanna's closest friend, wasn't convinced. She had known Darius long enough to recognize the pattern, grand gestures right before another disappointment. "Just be careful," she warned. "You're not the first person to get charmed back in by him. Sometimes the most dangerous mask is the one worn not to strangers, but to those who once knew the real face." Behind the smiles, Darius's reality was tightening like a noose. He was months behind on rent, owed thousands to 2 former friends who had fronted him cash for a business venture that never existed, and now the child support case was moving fast. The court date was set for early autumn, and he knew the judge would order payments he couldn't or wouldn't make. He told himself it wasn't fair, that she was taking from him out of spite, ignoring the fact that Cameron needed more than charm to grow. Pride can turn a man's reflection into a victim's portrait, painting his selfishness as injustice. One evening, he stayed later than usual after dropping Cameron back at Ayanna's apartment. Cameron was already asleep, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. Darius leaned against the counter, watching her pour tea. "We could make this easier," he said casually. "We don't need the court. We can work something out between us." Ayanna shook her head. "I've heard that before. I need something consistent for Cameron. That's all this is about." His smile faltered, just for a second. Then it was back, smooth as glass. He nodded, left without raising his voice, and texted her an hour later to say goodnight. What she didn't see was the message he sent right after, to someone else entirely. It's going to be handled before that date. When a man chooses to plan harm over facing the truth, he has already buried the part of himself capable of love. The last week of August brought heavy heat to Eastbrook, the kind that lingered even after sunset. Ayanna had been in good spirits, telling Janelle she was finally sleeping better now that she and Darius were being civil. She didn't know that civility, for him, was only a tactic. That Friday, he offered to take her and Cameron out for dinner. "Just us," he said, "a little family night before things get busy." She hesitated but agreed, thinking it would be good for Cameron to see them together. They laughed over burgers at a small diner, Cameron messy with ketchup, Darius smiling like the man she once knew. When they got back to her apartment, Cameron was dozing in the back seat. Darius carried him inside, laid him in bed, then came back to the living room. "Mind if I stay a bit?" "It's nice, us not fighting," he said. She poured 2 glasses of water and nodded. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, a small silence between them, the air heavy but not tense. Or so she thought. He parked a few blocks away. Darius had already decided this was the night. He parked a few blocks away to avoid his car being seen in front of the building too long, a detail he told himself was just being careful. But care born of malice is still cruelty in motion. Near midnight, Ayanna stood to head for bed. "Thanks for coming by," she said softly, walking toward the kitchen to rinse her glass. Darius followed quietly, his footsteps almost swallowed by the hum of the fridge. He made small talk, watching her place the glass in the rack. His hands tightened at his sides. One more chance to turn back, to choose father over fugitive. He didn't take it. As she turned to walk past him, he grabbed her arm, the force making her stumble. She started to speak, confusion flashing into fear, but his other hand came up, covering her mouth. She fought, nails catching his skin, feet kicking against the tile. He tightened his grip, shoving her backward toward the counter. In those moments, love was not forgotten. It was destroyed, crushed beneath the weight of his selfish will. The struggle was brief, but violent, the sound of her breath breaking under his hold. When her body finally went still, he eased her to the floor, chest heaving. For a second, he stared, as if waiting for her to move. She didn't. In the silence that followed, the hum of the fridge felt louder than any siren. He dragged her toward the couch, arranging her to look as if she'd fallen asleep there, a blanket draped loosely over her. He wiped the counter, washed the glass she'd used, and checked his phone. Minutes later, he slipped out into the warm night, leaving the door locked behind him. To kill the mother of your child is to strike at the very future you share. It is not just murder, it is the burning of your own legacy. It was Sharon Price who found her daughter the next morning. She had stopped by with Cameron's favorite breakfast, a habit she kept on Saturdays. The knock went unanswered. Sharon used her spare key and called out as she stepped inside. The apartment was still, the blanket over Ayanna rising in a way that seemed too still, too perfect. One glance at her daughter's face and the air left Sharon's lungs. The scream brought neighbors running, but the paramedics would later confirm what Sharon already knew. Ayanna had been gone for hours. Detectives Leona Carter and Tyrone Vance arrived within the hour. Leona scanned the living room, eyes narrowing at the lack of any real sign of disturbance. Tyrone noticed the locked door, no forced entry, no signs of a break-in. Neighbors recalled nothing unusual except Clarence Moore, who said he'd seen Darius's silhouette in the apartment window late the night before. Could have been visiting the boy, he said. When the person with the most to lose is the last one seen, suspicion blooms like a shadow over the truth. The autopsy confirmed strangulation. Defensive wounds marked Ayanna's arms and hands. Under her nails, there was skin, male DNA. When the results came back, they matched Darius Holt. Leona and Tyrone visited him at his apartment. He opened the door with feigned confusion, shirt wrinkled, eyes just a little too guarded. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning against the frame. "We just need to ask you a few questions," Leona replied. Inside, he told them he'd seen Ayanna 2 days ago, denied being at her place that night. But his phone records told another story pings near her apartment between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. Lying when the truth could save a soul is choosing to dig your own grave, one shovelful at a time. Tyrone pointed to faint scratches on Darius's forearm. "What happened here?" Darius glanced down. "Work accident," he said too quickly. Leona's gaze stayed fixed on his face. "We'll need you to come down to the station." At the precinct, they laid out the evidence piece by piece: the DNA under Ayanna's nails, the neighbor's statement, the cell phone data. His voice stayed calm, but sweat traced the edges of his hairline. Then came the final blow, a text recovered from his phone to an unknown number reading, "It's going to be handled before the court date." His silence was long enough to answer the question. By the time they placed the cuffs on him, he was no longer the man who had once charmed a crowd at a block party. He was small, hunched, the weight of consequence settling into his shoulders. Some betrayals echo louder in the cell than they ever did in the crime. The trial began 6 months later, drawing a heavy, expectant silence over the courthouse in Eastbrook. Every seat was filled. Friends from Ayanna's workplace, relatives who had traveled from out of state, neighbors who still remembered the sound of Sharon's scream that morning. Sharon sat in the front row, her hands trembling around a framed photo of Ayanna holding Cameron, his little smile frozen in a moment untouched by grief. She had aged in those 6 months, her once bright eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but her resolve had only hardened. The prosecution's opening statement left the room chilled. They spoke of a man drowning in debt, unwilling to carry the responsibilities that came with fatherhood, a man who valued his own comfort over the life of the woman who once loved him. They laid out the timeline, how Darius had built trust in those last few weeks, how he used it to get close, and how he ended it all in one calculated night. The witnesses were steady in their testimony. Janelle described Ayanna's growing anxiety as the court date approached, how she had confided in her about Darius's sudden kindness, feeling too good to be true. Clarence Moore recounted seeing Darius's figure in Ayanna's apartment window late that night. The image burned into his mind. The medical examiner's words were clinical but devastating, outlining the injuries, the defensive wounds, the clear signs of struggle. Darius's defense tried to recast the tragedy as an accident, claiming an argument spiraled, and he panicked. But the evidence told another story. His phone's location data, the scratches on his arms, and the message he had sent that read, "It's going to be handled before the court date." That single line was a confession without a confession, dripping with intent. Pride wrapped in deceit will always unravel under the weight of truth. As the trial entered its final day, the jury listened intently to closing arguments. The prosecution spoke directly to them, reminding them of the stakes, not just Ayanna's life, but the precedent of justice for those who think they can take life to avoid responsibility. The defense's voice was quieter now, less certain, the arguments fraying at the edges. The jury left the room to deliberate, and the wait began. In the hall, Sharon held Cameron in her lap, the boy too young to understand why everyone around him looked so solemn. After just under 4 hours, the jury filed back in. The foreperson rose, her voice unwavering as she read the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. A muffled sob rippled through the gallery. Darius didn't flinch, his gaze fixed on the table, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles blanched. The judge's sentence was swift and final, life in prison without the possibility of parole. In that moment, the truth settled like a stone in the room. No matter how hard he tried to justify it, Darius had stolen a mother from her child, and in doing so, destroyed his own future. To take a life to escape responsibility is to choose the coward's path, one that leads only to chains and shame. Love asks for sacrifice. Selfishness demands destruction. The two can never coexist. This case is more than a headline. It's a warning. When relationships sour and anger replaces reason, when pride overshadows the welfare of a child, there are paths that lead to help and there are paths that lead to ruin. Choose the former. Speak to someone you trust. Turn to family, to community leaders, to the law. Violence is not an escape. It is a trap that swallows both the guilty and the innocent. Ayanna's story should not have ended in a courtroom. The true justice would have been her life preserved, her dreams fulfilled, her son raised with both parents present in peace. Instead, Cameron will grow up with only fragments, photographs, stories, and the absence that will never stop echoing. This is the cost when someone believes their comfort outweighs another's life. What are your thoughts on this case? Could this tragedy have been avoided? Do you believe the sentence was enough? Share your opinions in the comments below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. If you haven't already, subscribe to True Crime's Altar for weekly true crime episodes, stories told in truth, stories the guilty prayed would stay buried.